We had a problem in doing Jekyll and Hyde for a kind of early evening slot, in that Mr. Hyde is supposed to be the most evil man in the world, and how do you make a central character the most evil man in the world in a show that has to be watched by all the family? So the obvious solution is to come up with people who are even worse, so that Hyde has to defeat them. So through the series, I've set up these two organizations, one of which is a secret branch of the government known as MIO, who deal with supernatural threats. It's their job to track down any monsters and capture them and kill them. I figured out, if people are going to accept our central character was a monster, then let's have loads of monsters in there. So MIO's job is to keep these monsters out of the way, and they've been so good that people believe there aren't any monsters in the world. But there is a rival organization called Tenebrae, which is an organization of monsters. And they both want Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde to be on their side. And Jekyll is kind of trapped in the middle. So Jekyll is having to deal with all these things, and there is the equivalent of a kind of monster of the week each week. There is a new threat coming in that Jekyll has to deal with. So there's a lot more monsters in there. A big influence for me on this series has been like superhero comics and superhero stories. And I sort of, The Incredible Hulk is very much nicked off Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as we could. In the pre-titles bit there, which is the sort of flashback to the Victorian Dr. Jekyll, I took two actual incidents from the book, which is the murder of Sir Danvers Carew, the politician, and also the book opens with this scene of Hyde trampling a girl underfoot. So I wanted to put that in, and it seemed to make sense to tie in with our story of our Dr. Jekyll 50 years later. The kind of events of that are being echoed. We wanted to do a series based on the idea of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but the book itself is very short. You can read it in one sitting. It's a great little story. In fact, Robert Louis Stevenson hit on this great idea, the idea of the alter ego and the idea of expressing your dark side and the idea of trying to keep these two worlds separate, and how once you go down that path, you can't get back because your dark side will get stronger and stronger and start to take over your good side. So that aspect of the book we definitely kept and wanted to keep. But if we had done just an adaptation of that book, you'd have got a great hour out of it.
Yeah.
And then you'd have had another 9 hours to fill, which would have been hard if your central character was dead.
Yes.
But there are flashbacks to the book, and there are allusions to the book, and we sort of, I suppose the series is about my Robert Jekyll, who is the grandson of the original Dr. Jekyll, finding out about his past and finding out why he is like he is. And we go back and see various bits of the original book through the series. There are two female characters in the book, and I've got them both into the prologue. One is the woman at the window who screams, and the other is the little girl who gets trampled underfoot. But otherwise, no, it's just about a bunch of men. And, I very much wanted the series to have, an equal balance of male and female characters, and to get in a lot of drama and romance and intrigue. It was, for instance, recently the BBC did Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which was a fantastic series, but people didn't know what to make of it. They're saying, this is a bit like sort of grown-up Harry Potter. And you think, well, yeah, on one level, but you could also say Harry Potter is a kind of younger version of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. The idea that fantasy is just for kids is ridiculous. Two of the big influences for me on it were Indiana Jones and James Bond. Indiana Jones managed to pull off a great trick in Indiana Jones, where you start in a real world where Indiana Jones is in there as an archaeologist dealing with these problems, going up against the Germans. But by the end of the film, you're in this fantasy realm where the Ark of the Covenant is up and running, and Nazis are having their faces melted off. But you've kind of bought the license to do that by drawing them into this world, and you care about the characters, and great use of humor in Indiana Jones as well, which doesn't undermine what you're doing, it kind of adds to it. This is a long series. This is a 10-hour series, and the hope is that this will be a series that will come back. And 50% of the time, Tom is required to be Dr. Jekyll, and 50% of the time is required to be Mr. Hyde. And we felt very early on that we couldn't have him in a sort of huge monster makeup. We didn't want to have him with fangs and long claws and sprouting hair all over and shuffling around like some kind of mad ape. We wanted him to be the embodiment of Jekyll's dark side, but for it very much to be done as a performance thing. And basically, we have Dr. Jekyll as a very repressed, buttoned-up, slightly posh Englishman, and then Hyde is letting it all hang out. He's out there, he's the sexiest and most dangerous man in the room. So we got these two kind of male archetypes. But I also know that if you do Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, a lot of people are going to turn on in the first episode because they're going to be saying, oh, I want to see the transformation. I want to see him turn into a monster. And I also needed to sell the idea that Hyde was a monster. But I thought what would be great was the idea that Hyde has the monster inside him. So we show in this sequence the monster emerging, and we see what Hyde is capable of, but he then kind of swallows and consumes the monster so that we know that that's within him, but he can carry on acting and behaving like a reasonably normal person. Oh, it's gone way beyond what I ever imagined we could pull off. I mean, as a writer, you're used to coming up in your first draft, you just write whatever you want. You get carried away. And it doesn't cost anything to write that stuff. But in the back of your mind and in your heart of hearts, you know that most of that is not going to be filmed. You're not going to have the budget and the resources to pull that off. But what was great working on this project is right from the start, ITV said, no, let's do that. Let's do that. Let's make it as big and exciting as possible. I wrote in the first 3 episodes, a lot of the action takes place in Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was then. And I thought, well, I'll write this and we'll probably end up filming it in Wales, with the Welsh hills standing in for the sort of lowlands of India. But they said, no, go out, film it all out in Sri Lanka. And we did, and it does look fantastic.